Chapter 5: Adverse Drug Reactions and Medication Errors. In this chapter, we discuss two related issues of drug safety: adverse drug reactions, also known as adverse drug events, and medication errors, a major cause of adverse drug reactions. We can begin with adverse drug reactions and then discuss medication errors. So, as stated above, adverse drug reactions. An ADR, as defined by the World Health Organization, is any noxious, unintended, and undesired effect that occurs at normal drug doses. Adverse reactions can range in intensity from mildly annoying to life-threatening. Among the more mild reactions are drowsiness, nausea, itching, and possibly a rash. Severe reactions include potential fatal conditions such as neutropenia, hepatocellular injury, cardiac dysrhythmias, anaphylaxis, and hemorrhage. So, the scope of the problem, therefore. In 2011, statistical brief by the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality highlighted a dramatic rise in ADR despite interventions to decrease the incidence. More than 800,000 outpatients sought emergency treatment because of ADRs. Among hospitalized inpatients, over 1,735,000 experienced adverse outcomes due to drug reactions and medication errors. And of these, more than 53,000 patients died. Many of these incidences were preventable, but unfortunately, when drugs are carefully prescribed and patients are well educated on proper use, many ADRs can be avoided or minimalized. So, definitions: side effects. A side effect is formally defined as a nearly unavoidable secondary drug effect produced at therapeutic doses. Common examples include drowsiness caused by traditional antihistamines and gastric irritation caused by aspirin. Side effects are generally predictable, and their intensity is dose dependent. Some side effects develop soon after drugs are started, whereas others may not appear until a drug has been taken for several weeks or even months. Toxicity. The formal definition of toxicity is the degree of detrimental physiologic effects caused by excessive drug dosing. Examples include profound respiratory depression from an overdose of morphine and severe hypoglycemia from an overdose of insulin. Although the formal definition of toxicity includes only those severe reactions that occur when dosage is excessive, in everyday language the term toxicity has come to mean any severe ADR, regardless of the dose that caused it. An example of this is when administered in therapeutic doses. Many anti-cancer drugs cause neutropenia, thereby putting the patient at high risk for further infections. This neutropenia may be called toxicity, even though it was produced when the dosage was therapeutic. Our allergic reactions. An allergic reaction is an immune response. For an allergic reaction to occur, there must be prior sensitization of the immune system. After the immune system has been sensitized to a drug, re-exposure to that drug can trigger an allergic response. The intensity of allergic reaction can range from mild itching to severe rash or even anaphylaxis. Estimates suggest that less than 10% of ADRs are the allergic type. The intensity of an allergic reaction is determined primarily by the degree of sensitization of the immune system, not by drug dosage. Put another way, the intensity of allergic reaction is largely independent of dosage. As a result, a dose that elicits a very strong reaction in one allergic patient may elicit a very mild reaction in another. Furthermore, patients' sensitivity to a drug can change over time. A dose that elicits a mild reaction early in treatment may produce an intense or severe reaction later on. Very few medications cause severe allergic reactions. In fact, most serious reactions are caused by just one drug family, the penicillins. Other drugs noted for causing allergic reactions include the nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drugs and the sulfonamide group of compounds, which includes certain diuretics, antibiotics, or oral hypoglycemic agents. Your idiosyncratic effect. The idiosyncratic effect is defined as an uncommon drug response resulting from a genetic predisposition. Examples of this idiosyncratic effect occur in people with a glucose 6 phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency. That G6PD deficiency is an X-linked inherited condition that occurs primarily in people with African and Mediterranean ancestry. When people with a G6PD deficiency take drugs such as sulfonamides or aspirin, they develop varying degrees of red blood cell hemolysis, which may become life-threatening. Sorry, lost my spot there. The paradoxical effect. A paradoxical effect is the opposite of the intended drug response. A common example is insomnia or excitement that may occur when some children and older adults are given a benzodiazepine for sedation. Your iatrogenic disease. An iatrogenic disease is a disease that occurs as a result of medical care or treatment. The term iatrogenic disease is also used to denote a disease produced by drugs. Iatrogenic disease are nearly identical to naturally occurring diseases. An example of this is patients taking certain antipsychotic drugs may develop a syndrome whose symptoms closely resemble those of Parkinson's. Physical dependence. Physical dependence is a state in which the body has adapted to drug exposure in such a way that an abstinence syndrome will result if drug use is discontinued. Physical dependence develops during long-term use of certain drugs, such as opioids, alcohol, barbiturates, and amphetamines. The precise nature of the abstinence syndrome is determined by the drug involved. Although physical dependence is usually associated with opioids, these are not the only dependence-inducing drugs. A variety of other centrally acting drugs, your ethanol, barbiturates, and amphetamines, can promote dependence. Furthermore, some drugs that work outside the central nervous system can cause physical dependence of a sort. Because a variety of drugs can cause physical dependence of one type or another, and because withdrawal reactions have the potential for harm, patients should be warned against abrupt discontinuation of any medication without first consulting a healthcare professional. Carcinogenic effect. The term carcinogenic effect refers to the ability of certain medications and environmental chemicals to cause cancers. Fortunately, only a few therapeutic agents are carcinogenic. Ironically, several of the drugs used to treat cancer are among those with the greatest carcinogenic potential. Evaluating drugs for the ability to cause cancer is extremely difficult. Evidence of neoplastic disease may not appear until 20 or more years after initial exposure to a cancer-causing compound. Teratogenic effects. A teratogenic effect is a drug-induced birth defect. Medicines and other chemicals capable of causing birth defects are all called teratogens. Teratogenesis is discussed further in Chapter 7. Organ-specific toxicity. Many drugs are toxic to specific organs. Common examples include injury to the kidneys caused by amphotericin B, an antifungal drug, injury to the heart caused by doxorubicin, an anti-cancer drug, injury to the lungs caused by amiodarone, an antidysrhythmic drug, and injury to the inner ear caused by an aminoglycoside antibiotic, gentamicin. Patients using these drugs should be monitored for signs of developing injury. In addition, patients should be educated about these signs and advised to seek medical attention if they start to appear. Two types of organ-specific toxicity deserve special comment. These are the injury to the liver and altered cardiac function, as evidenced by the prolonged QT interval on an electrocardiogram. Both are discussed next. So starting with the hepatotoxic drugs. As drugs undergo metabolism by the liver, they are converted to toxic products that can injure liver cells. These drugs are called hepatotoxic drugs. In the US, drugs are the leading cause of acute liver failure, a rare condition that can rapidly prove to be fatal. Fortunately, liver failure from using known hepatotoxic drugs is relatively rare, with an incidence of less than 1 in 50,000. Drugs that can cause liver failure more often than this are removed from the market, unless they are indicated for a life-threatening illness. More than 50 drugs are known to be hepatotoxic, and the following table lists a bunch of them. So here is an excellent time to hit that pause button so you can review. I'll go over the basics such as your statins and other lipid-lowering drugs, your oral anti-diabetic drugs, your anti-seizure drugs, antifungals, anti-gout, antidepressants, antimicrobials, drugs for treating tuberculosis, immunosuppressants, antiretroviral, and I guess there's a list of others that don't jump into a nice category. Combining a hepatotoxic drug with certain other drugs may increase the risk of liver damage. Tylenol is a hepatotoxic drug that can damage the liver when taken in excessive doses. When taken in a therapeutic dose, however, acetaminophen or Tylenol does not usually create a risk for liver injury. However, the drug is taken with just 2 or 3 alcoholic beverages, severe injury can result. That leads us now to the other end of the spectrum of the QT interval drugs. So these are cardiac drugs that can cause cardiac damage. The term QT interval drugs, or simply QT drugs, refers to the ability of some of the medications to prolong the QT interval on the electrocardiogram, thereby creating a risk for serious dysrhythmias. The QT interval is a measure of the time required for the ventricles to repolarize after each contraction. When the QT interval is prolonged, or more than 470 milliseconds per postpubertal males, or more than 480 milliseconds per postpubertal females, patients can develop a dysrhythmia, also known as torsades de pointe, which can progress to potentially fatal ventricular fibrillation. There's more than 100 drugs that are known to cause a QT prolongation, torsades de pointes, or both. The following table 5.2 here, lists the QT drugs are found in many of the drug families. Several QT drugs have been withdrawn from the market because of deaths linked to their use, and the use of another QT drug. An example is cisapride, or propylacid, which is now restricted. To reduce the risk of QT drugs, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration now requires that all new drugs be tested for the ability to cause QT prolongation. So here are a list of all the drugs that can increase or prolong your QT interval. Another good spot to hit pause. Again, I'll go over the main points: the cardiovascular antidysrhythmics, your ACE inhibitors, your antibiotics, antifungals, antidepressants, antipsychotics, your antiemetics, anti-cancer drugs, drugs for ADHD, your nasal decongestants, and again, that list of other drugs that can also cause a prolonged QT. So, identifying adverse drug reactions. It can be very difficult to determine whether a specific drug is responsible for an observed adverse event because of other factors, especially the underlying illness and other drugs being taken, could be the actual cause. To help determine whether a particular drug is responsible, the following questions should be considered. Did symptoms appear shortly after the drug was first used? Did symptoms abate when the drug was discontinued? Did symptoms reappear when the drug was reinstituted? Is the illness itself sufficient to explain the event? Or are other drugs in the regimen sufficient to explain this event? If the answers reveal a temporal relationship between the presence of the drug and the adverse event, and if the event cannot be explained by the illness itself or by other drugs in the regimen, then there's a high probability that the drug under suspicion is indeed the culprit. Unfortunately, this process is limited It can only identify adverse effects that occur while the drug is being used. It cannot identify adverse events that develop years after drug withdrawal, nor can it identify effects that develop slowly over the course of prolonged drug use. Which brings us to adverse reactions to new drugs. Preclinical and clinical trials of new drugs cannot detect all of the adverse drug reactions that drugs can be able to cause. In fact, about 50% of all new drugs have serious adverse drug reactions that are not revealed during phase 1 nor phase 3 of the trial. Because newly released drugs may have as yet unreported adverse effects, you should be alert for unusual responses when prescribing new drugs. If the patient develops a new symptom, it is wise to suspect that the drug may be responsible, even if the symptoms are not described in the literature. It is good practice to initially check post-market drug evaluations, and again, you can check that via the FDA website, to determine whether serious problems have been reported. If the drug is especially new, however, you may be the first provider to have observed this effect. If you suspect that the drug is causing a previously unknown adverse effect, you should report it to the MedWatch, the FDA Medical Products Reporting Program. You can file an online report, and again, it's on the FDA website. Because voluntarily reporting by healthcare professionals is an important mechanism for bringing acute drug reactions or adverse drug reactions to light, you should report all those, even if absolute proof of the drug's complicity isn't established yet. So, ways that we can minimize adverse drug reactions. The responsibility for reducing adverse drug reactions lies with everyone associated with drug production and its use. The pharmaceutical industry must strive to produce the safest medicines possible. The provider must select the least harmful medicine for a particular patient and provide clear instruction for its use. The nurse must evaluate patients for adverse drug reactions and educate patients in ways to avoid or minimize harm. And patients and their families must take medication only as directed. Watch for signs of any kind of adverse drug reactions, which may be developing, and to make sure that you seek medical attention if one appears. When patients are using drugs that are toxic to specific organs, function of that target organ should be monitored. The liver, kidneys, bone marrow are important sites of drug toxicity. For drugs that are toxic to the liver, the patient should be monitored for signs and symptoms of liver damage. So, jaundice, dark urine, light colored stool, nausea, vomiting, malaise, any kind of abdominal discomfort or loss of appetite, as well as periodic tests of liver function. So, your AST and ALT should be performed. For drugs that are toxic to the kidneys, the patient should undergo routine urinalysis and measurement of serum creatinine and creatinine clearance. For drugs that are toxic to bone marrow, periodic complete blood cell count should be required. Adverse effects can be reduced by individualizing therapy. When choosing drugs for a particular patient, the provider must balance the drug's risk and benefit. Drugs that are likely to harm a specific patient should be avoided unless the benefit of the drug exceeds the risk for its injury. So there are special alerts and management guidelines. In an effort to decrease harm associated with drugs that cause serious adverse effects, the FDA requires special alerts and management guidelines. These may take the form of a medication guide for patients, a boxed warning to alert providers, or risk evaluation and mitigation strategy, which can involve patients, providers, and the pharmacists. So, medication guides, commonly called med guides, are FDA-approved documents created to educate patients on how to minimize harm from potential dangerous drugs. In addition, a med guide is required when the FDA has determined that 1. The patient's adherence to directions for the drug use is essential for efficacy, and 2. Patients need to know the potentially serious effects when deciding to use a new drug. All med guides use a standard format that provides information under the following main headings: What is the most important information I should know about this drug? What is this drug, including a description of the drug and its indication? Who should not take this drug? How should I take it? Include importance of adherence to drug dosing instructions, any kind of special instructions about administration, what to do in case of overdose and what to do in case a dose is missed. What should I avoid while taking? Include activities, so your sunbathing, driving, or any kinds of foods, drugs, pregnancy, breastfeeding. What are the possible and reasonably likely side effects? And then general information about the safe and effective use of a prescription drug. Additional headings may be added by the manufacturer as appropriate when the approval of the FDA Med guides for all drug products that require one are available online. Again, take a look at the FDA website. The Med guide should be provided whenever a prescription is filled and even when a drug sample is being handed out. Your boxed warnings. Boxed warnings, also known as black box warnings, is the strongest safety warning a drug can carry and still remain on the market. Text for the warning is presented inside a box with a heavy black border. The FDA requires a boxed warning on drugs with serious or life-threatening risks. The purpose of the warning is to alert the provider to 1. Potentially severe side effects, so your life-threatening dysrhythmias, suicidality, or major fetal harm, as well as 2. Ways to prevent and reduce that harm. The avoidance of a teratogenic drug during pregnancy. A boxed warning provides a concise summary of the adverse effect of concern. A boxed warning must appear prominently on the package insert, on the product label, and even in the magazine advertising. Drugs that have a boxed warning must also have a med guide. The risk of evaluating and mitigation strategies, also known as REMS. A REMS is simply a plan to minimize drug-induced harm. For most drugs that have a REMS, a med guide is all that is needed. A few drugs, however, the REMS may have additional components. An example of that is the REMS for the anti-acne drug isotretinoin has provisions that pertain to a patient, provider, and pharmacist. This program, known as iPledge, is needed because isotretinoin can cause serious birth defects. The iPledge program was designed to ensure that patients who are pregnant or may become pregnant will not have access to the drug. Again, details for the iPledge program are presented more in Chapter 85, and all REMS have received FDA approval can still be found on their website. Which brings us to medication errors. Medication errors are a major cause of morbidity and mortality, according to the Institute of Medicine. Every year, med errors injure at least 1.5 million Americans and kill an estimated 7,000. The financial costs are staggering among hospital patients alone. Treatment and drug-related injuries cost at least $3.5 billion a year. So what do we consider a med error? The National Coordinating Council for the Medication Error Reporting and Prevention defines a medication error as any preventable event that may cause or lead to an inappropriate medication use or patient harm. While this medication is in the control of the healthcare professional, patient, or consumer, such events may be related to professional practice. Healthcare products, procedures, and systems, including prescribing or communication, product labeling, packaging and nomenclature, compounding, dispensing, distribution, administration, education, monitoring, and use. Note that by this definition, a medication error can be made by many people, beginning with workers in the pharmaceutical industry, followed by the people in the healthcare delivery system, and ending with a patient and their family members. In this chapter, we focus on med errors attributed to healthcare providers, however. These typically fall into one of the following categories: prescribing practices, inappropriate drug selection, error in drug dosage, lack of clear instructions, and in a classic illegible writing. Oversight, failure to keep up to date with medication lists, failure to continue or discontinue medications, or the absence of medication reconciliations. And then a communication error, inadequate or unclear instructions, failure to verify drugs that sound alike, and inadequate patient education. So the following table here has a list of drugs that sound alike or look alike. So it's a good spot to kind of pause and take a look at some similarities. Ways to reduce medication errors. Organizations throughout many countries are working to design and implement measures to reduce med errors. Changes having the most dramatic effect have been those that focused on the IOM recommendations to help and encourage patients and their families to be active, informed members of the healthcare team, and give healthcare professionals and providers the tools and information needed to prescribe, dispense, and administer drugs as safely as possible. Implementation of technology to reduce errors has had remarkable success as well. An example is replacing handwritten medication orders with a computerized order entry system has reduced med errors by about 50%. Using a barcode system that matches the patient's armband barcode to a drug barcode has decreased med errors in the same institution by as much as 85%. Targeted interventions to address provider-related errors can be employed to decrease med errors by healthcare providers. So the following are listed in the table. Provider-related med errors. I'll go over the big ones. Inappropriate drug selection, entering in the drug dosage, lack of clear labeling instructions, illegible writing. Again, failure to keep up to date with med lists, failure to discontinue or continue medications, the absence of a med reconsolidation, and inadequate or unclear instructions, or inadequate patient education. So, incorporating medication reconciliation has resulted in decreasing med errors by 70% and reducing adverse drug reactions by about 15%. So, medication reconciliation. What is med reconciliation and when is it done? Well, it is the process of comparing a list of all medications that a patient is currently taking with a list of new medications that are about to be provided. Reconciliation is conducted whenever a patient undergoes a transition in the care, in which new medications may be ordered or existing orders may be changed. Transitions in care include hospital admissions, discharges, or moving to a different level of care within the hospital, or transferring to another facility or going back home. So, how is it being conducted? Well, there's 5 steps. 1. Create a list of current meds. For all drugs, include the name, the dose, route, indication, and any kind of dosing intervals. For patients entering a hospital, the list will consist of all medications being taken at home, including vitamins, herbal products, and any prescriptions or non-prescription drugs. Step 2 is to create a list of all the medications to be prescribed in the new setting. And then step 3 will compare the medications on both lists. Step 4 will adjust medications based on the comparison. For example, the provider would discontinue drugs that are duplicates or inappropriate and would avoid drugs that can interact adversely. Step 5, when the next transition in care occurs, provide the updated, reconciled list to the patient and the new providers. By consulting the list, a new provider will be less likely to omit or prescribe a medication or commit a dosing error, and will be less likely to prescribe a new medication that might duplicate or negate the effect of a current medication, or interact with a current medication to cause a serious adverse event. Every time a new transition in care occurs, reconciliation should be conducted. So, does medication reconciliation reduce medication errors? Definitely. About 60% of med errors can occur when the patients undergo a transition of care, so this medication reconciliation should be done to eliminate some of these errors. Should medication reconciliation be conducted at discharge? Absolutely. And in most hospitals, you'll notice that you can't discharge a patient until it's been completed. When a patient leaves the facility, they should receive a single clear, comprehensive list of all new medications as well as current medications in their regimen that they will be taking after discharge. The list should include any medications ordered at the time of discharge as well as any other medication the patient will be taking, including the over-the-counter drugs, vitamins, and herbal products, and any other nutritional supplements. In addition, the list should include all prescription medications that the patient had been taking at home but had been temporarily discontinued during their episode of care. A discharge should not include drugs that have been used during their stay within the hospital but are no longer being used now. The patient, with the patient's permission and the next provider of care, should receive the discharge list so that the new provider will be able to continue the reconciliation process. So, many medication error results from using error-prone abbreviations, symbols, and dose designations. To address that concern, the Institute for the Safe Medication Practice and the FDA has compiled a list of error-prone abbreviation symbols and dose designations. The following table have recommended against their use. This list includes 8 different entries that have been banned by the Joint Commission. So here you can see all the abbreviations, symbols, and dose designations that can promote or prove to be known to cause med errors. So again, it's a good spot to hit pause so you can kind of get an idea of what not to write. As a wealth of information is available for reducing med errors, there is also a good place to start here. So resources on decreasing med errors, there's a couple of websites here. Again, good spot to hit pause, take a look at them just so that you're familiar. So finally, how to report a med error. You can report a medication error through the MIR program, a nationwide system run by the ISMP. All reporting is confidential and can be done by phone or through the internet. There's a website listed here, and the MER program encourages participation by all healthcare providers, including the pharmacist, nurse, physician, and students. The objective is not to establish blame, but instead to improve patient safety by increasing our knowledge of medication errors. All information gathered by the MER program is forwarded to the FDA, the ISMP, and the product manufacturer. And that completes our chapter here. So I'll see you at the next one.